Just like the handheld x86 market moves at a blazing pace, the same can be said for the mini PC segment, which has really started to shine thanks to major advancements from AMD's APUs, which pack a tremendous amount of power into a compact package and provide solid performance to someone looking for a solid alternative to the typical desktop PC. The AM08 Pro from AceMagic manages to pack AMD's Rembrandt-based Ryzen 9 6900HX with 680M graphics into a mini PC with a small footprint. For the first time ever on my channel, I am excited to take a look at a mini PC and check out what the 6900HX is capable of, especially when it comes to PC gaming and emulation. So please join me, Rob, the Retro Tech Dad, as we explore everything this mini PC has to offer and find out if the 6900HX is still a powerhouse APU worth considering in this form factor. Before we dive into the specific specs of this mini PC, let's talk a little bit about the Ryzen 9 6900HX. This processor was primarily designed to be used for gaming laptops, and so it's a pretty substantial APU based on the AMD Rembrandt generation with 8 Zen 3 Plus cores and 16 threads clocked at a guaranteed base of 3.3 GHz with a boost up to 4.9 GHz and is manufactured on the Taiwan Semiconductor 6nm fab. Additionally, this chipset is rated for a 45-watt default TDP, and with the Radeon 680M graphics, which should be quite familiar for regular viewers of the channel as it's the same GPU found in the 6800U, except on the 6900HX it is clocked higher out of the box. So let's talk about this mini PC from AceMagic. This is the AM08 Pro model and comes with the AMD Ryzen 9 6900HX that we just briefly talked about, and features AMD Radeon 680M graphics. Now, my specific computer was sent with 32GB of DDR5 4800MHz SODIMM RAM with support for dual slots, and a 512GB 2022-80 NVMe SSD drive with support for an additional 2.5-inch hard drive. It is available in a few configurations, including a bare bones model. There is integrated Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2 and multiple ports including USB Type-C 4.0, Gigabit Ethernet, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports with support for 4K at 60Hz and 4 USB 3.0 ports. The AM08 Pro comes pre-installed with Windows 11 Pro out of the box. The specific configuration that I have will be available for about $600 with the Amazon coupon and the exclusive 5% off code in the description for my viewers, and I'd like to thank the folks at Camrui for sending me this unit for the purposes of this review, and they did not view this video prior to publishing. Alright, time to see what's inside this hefty box, and this might be one of the bigger boxes I've shown on camera. Finally, all done cutting through the tape, and let's fold back the box and check out the contents. I see something that says gaming PC, which definitely has me pretty excited. It's nicely packaged and very secure with the foam. Alright, let's toss the box and the foamy out of the way and continue on. Let's quickly take a look around the box and see if it has any details about what's inside. As you can see, this is the Ace Magician Mini Gaming PC. And on the side, we've got some information about one of the cooler features on this mini PC, which is the dial that lets you switch from silent, auto, or performance modes. The other sides don't have anything worth mentioning. Finally, on the back, we have some of the spec options with the specific model choices being selected. So it's time to crack the seal open and pull off this plastic wrap and, of course, the obligatory ASMR. Let's take the sleeve off and toss this to the side and finally reveal this mini PC. I'll use this convenient tab and get the mini PC out of its package, and for right now, let's put it aside and see what else is included here. Okay, we have the fairly basic user manual in multiple languages and a sheet that lists some compatible memory brands. In the left side compartment, we have the power cable and the power supply, which is about half the size of the actual PC itself, and then finally an HDMI cable. Beyond that, there is nothing else included in this package. So let's grab the mini PC and take a closer look around the computer itself and check out some of the design elements, details, as well as all of the inputs and outputs included on the unit. So this is designed to stand up like a mini tower, and so at the top we have the Ace Magician branding with that performance mode toggle that I mentioned earlier, allowing you to switch to different profiles on the fly. The top area also has a RGB backlight with various lighting effects. Let's peel off this protective film so we can take a closer look at the finishing and materials here. Okay, seriously, this might be the hardest film I've ever had to pull off any piece of electronics. This is really stuck on here. In fact, it's so hard to pull off that I managed to take off the side panel, which by the way is held on with magnets and is actually a very nice feature that we will talk about more in just a moment. However, back to this crazy sticky film, and you can probably tell just how much strength I am using to peel this back. It's a bit unfortunate because it has left behind a good amount of residue, which is present on both sides, and now I need to go off camera for a moment and clean this nastiness off. Okay, much better. On one side, we have the exhaust vent with the word gaming etched into this vent. It's pretty subtle when just standing up. And of course, we have the AMD branding here with that Ryzen 9 and Radeon graphics. On the bottom, we have additional vents and some typical markings. Alright, on the front, we have the USB Type-C 4.0, two USB-A 3.0 ports, the 3.5mm audio port, and the power switch, which is built into that performance dial. On the back, we have the reset switch for the BIOS, two more USB-A 3.0 ports, two HDMI 2.0 ports, Ethernet, and of course power. Now before we take a look inside, let's just get a quick size on the actual PC and also a quick comparison to some other well-known quantities to get an idea of the size and just how small the unit is overall. First, let's get the measurements on screen, and this unit measures in at 7.42 inches or about 188mm in height, 3.06 inches or about 78mm in width at the base, and finally 5.89 inches or about 150mm in depth, making this a very compact unit overall. And as I mentioned, it does have a very interesting design that is meant to be standing up like a mini tower. Now for some comparisons to further demonstrate its small footprint. Here is the AM08 Pro with an Xbox Series controller placed on the side of the unit. And then for another well-known controller with the DualSense also placed on the side of the unit. Finally, I grabbed my external 3.5-inch Western Digital hard drive and placed it side by side with the unit, which I really feel drives home just how small this unit really is. Okay, now it's time to take a peek at the internals and also use this as an opportunity to see how easy it is to access certain components. I showed off one of the neater things I like about this mini PC, which is having one of the side panels that come off easily using magnets to keep it in place. And it's very easy to do, but also still secure enough that it's not just flying off. The plastic is fairly rigid, as you can see with my bending. And right off the bat, I already like that we have immediate access to the RAM, the M.2 SSD, as well as the location to drop in a 2.5-inch hard drive. This is definitely one of the easiest to access mini PCs I've seen to make changes to these components, as I've seen some where the RAM and SSD is buried under other components. Since I have the 32GB configuration, I already have two sticks of 16GB DDR5 RAM here, which is from ADATA, a reputable brand that I am quite familiar with. Again, these are easy to access and change out. This entire portion was clearly designed with some thought for the end user, and this is very much appreciated. I love seeing something like this with these mini PCs. So powering on the computer for the first time, and the setup process is actually faster than usual, as this has been pre-configured to work with a local account, which means you can choose to sign into your Microsoft account later on if you want. As a result, we are able to get right into the Windows desktop pretty quickly. As I mentioned in the specs section, this is running Windows 11 and looks to be a very clean install with just the standard Microsoft software included. There isn't any additional software installed from the vendor, and during my time in Windows 11, I did not encounter any weird issues. As with any new Windows 11 machine, you will most likely want to grab the latest updates as well as drivers for the 6900HX, which has solid driver support from AMD. Now with these mini PCs, I always like to take a look at the BIOS and see what kind of options we have here for tweaking. This BIOS does have the Advanced tab available to us, which allows us to do all kinds of tweaking here. One of the key areas will be adjustments to the CPU as well as the integrated video memory, which we are able to change values here. This can be done under the AMD CBS option in advance. For example, under the graphics configuration, we can change the UMA frame buffer size up to 16GB. Another good thing that can be adjusted under the SMU common options is the thermal junction or TJ Max, which is set to 87 degrees by default. In addition, we can change the system configuration to make use of that top end of 54 watts instead of the default cap of 45 watts built into the performance mode toggle. Anyways, I just wanted to quickly go through these menus and options just to give an idea of what is available here. As always, do not change any settings unless you are comfortable doing so and understand what the individual settings do. Okay, so let's talk some numbers and first run our usual synthetic tests. For all of my benchmarks, I have the PC using that performance mode toggle, which caps it at 45 watts. Let's start out with Geekbench 6 and see where the 6900HX stands. I always like keeping reference for future comparisons as well as giving us an idea of how it might perform. For the single core score, the 6900HX scored a 2083, and for the multi-core score, it scored 10,107, which unsurprisingly is higher than any 6800U device I've tested on the channel, given that we are dealing with more power here. Next we have the popular 3D Mark Time Spy benchmark, and again unsurprisingly it has better performance than the 6800U, with an overall score of 2,754, a graphics score of 2,456, and finally a CPU score of 8,877. The CPU performance in particular is pretty solid. Finally, I always like running at least one in-game benchmark tool, and here I have the Street Fighter 6 benchmarking, and this is set to 1080p with low settings, and as you can see it does pass the Street Fighter 6 requirements at these settings. Now let's shift focus and talk about PC gaming on this 6900HX mini PC. This AMD APU is quite performant given its power usage and overall form factor. Yet again, I will be using the performance mode toggle available to us on this mini PC. In addition, I'll be showing off only 2023 releases, and so let's start out with some Diablo 4. This is definitely not the first time I've featured this game on the channel, and I have the game here set to 1080p, 60 frames per second, with AMD's FSR2 set to performance using high settings, and it is performing incredibly well. I've talked quite a bit about how so many 2023 releases offer lots of scaling options, which really helps out these APUs. If you are curious, I did cover how the Ryzen 7 6800U performs with 2023 releases recently. Next up, we have the sequel to Fallen Order with Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and again, this is another game that I'm able to set to that 1080p resolution. For the footage, I am locked to 30 frames per second with the low preset and AMD FSR set to balance. Now leaving the frame rate unlocked using the performance option for FSR, the game did reach about 45 frames per second, which tells me that this game can be tweaked to either prioritize frame rate or graphics. For example, Ultra Performance with AMD FSR produces fairly good results and can reach almost 60 frames per second at times, which I think is fairly impressive. Finally, we have a very new release, as in just a few days old, with the PC port of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. This game is another surprisingly solid performer, with the resolution set to 1080p using a 30 frames per second lock with no AMD FSR being used here, and the game is set to a medium preset. Again, it tells me that this APU has some room to breathe, and Ratchet and Clank can be adjusted to either favor frame rate or graphical fidelity, which is always a nice thing to have. Regardless, this game is quite the looker here and plays really well with this PC. Now let's move on to some high-end emulation, and obviously the 6900HX will have no issues with consoles from the 5th generation and earlier. And to be honest, it does incredibly well with the 6th generation as well. Like my benchmarking and PC gaming tests, I have the mini PC set to that performance mode toggle. One of the things I've noticed with this computer is that I really didn't spend a lot of time tweaking settings to get things to work. For the most part, you can set the resolution and it will just run, since we're not trying to squeeze as much performance out of this mini PC as there is plenty available to us. So let's start out with our round of Nintendo consoles with the Nintendo Gamecube up first, and really unsurprisingly, this has no issues with Gamecube emulation using the Dolphin emulator, and we can definitely turn the resolution way up. Here's the demanding F0GX, and this is running at about 4 times native resolution and stays very close to 60 frames per second as the footage shows. And then for a bit lighter game, Super Mario Sunshine is another great performer, and with this one we can turn the resolution all the way up to 5K, going with 8 times the native resolution, with absolutely insane performance, and Mario Sunshine looks fantastic. Switching over to Nintendo's next console with the Wii and Dolphin emulator, here we have Donkey Kong Country Returns, the awesome return of the Donkey Kong Country franchise developed by Retro Studios. For this one, I have Dolphin set to 6 times the native resolution, which is the 4K option, and again, it's just another solid performer, staying mostly locked at that 60 frames per second and looks absolutely gorgeous. And let's continue with the Mario theme and with some Super Mario Galaxy 2. Just like Donkey Kong Country Returns, this is another game I have set to 6 times the native resolution, running at 4K, and it just looks so fantastic and is so buttery smooth and runs very well. And finally, for our last of the Nintendo consoles, let's jump straight into the Nintendo Switch, and yes, we will definitely continue the Mario theme with some Super Mario Odyssey. For this one, we will be using the Yuzu emulator, and I have this set to 1.5 native resolution, and for the most part this does very well with the occasional stuttering from shader compilation. Otherwise, this is very solid. And instead of checking out Metroid Prime using Dolphin, I thought it would be fun to change it up and feature the remastered version for the Switch. I'm kind of amazed because this one runs super well and looks very nice set to that 1.5x native resolution, and this one might even be able to get away with a higher setting. Regardless, it is working very well with the 6900HX and Yuzu. So it's time to switch brands and check out some original Xbox using XEMU, and first up is one of my personal favorite games that remain exclusive to the console. Jet Set Radio Future is set to 2 times native resolution, and as you can see, has no issues with this one. It's another very solid game, and the 6900HX is yet again flexing its performance capabilities. And one more of my personal favorites that remain exclusive to the original Xbox, Panzer Dragoon Orta is a trickier game to run and can be quite demanding. However, set to 2 times native resolution, and we're not having much trouble here with this one with just occasional stutters. Panzer Dragoon Orta is definitely a game that benefits from the higher resolution and looks really nice with that upscaling. Moving to Microsoft's 7th generation console, the Xbox 360, and using Xenia Canary, let's feature a different game with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time Reshelled, which is the remake of the arcade game, but this time developed by Ubisoft. This game is a digital exclusive to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 and has never been ported anywhere else and is currently delisted. I've set this one to 1080p in the Xenia Canary config, and this one mostly stays close to 60 frames per second and runs quite well. And a game that I always love to feature when talking about Xbox 360, here is the original Forza Horizon, which got its start on the Xbox 360. Just like Turtles in Time, I've set the resolution to 1080p in the Xenia Canary config file, and this one runs great. By the way, for this footage, I did set the VSync off in the config files so it would play nice with my capture card. This is a game that is actually supposed to run at 30 frames per second and has no issues hitting that target and staying there. Now it's time for some of the Sony consoles, and let's check out a bit of PlayStation 2 emulation with PCSX2. We'll start out with one of my favorite racing games. Outrun 2006 is always a great time and the perfect game to show off some of the 6900HX's power. Outrun 2006 has always been one of the more demanding PS2 games to emulate, and for this one I am set to 3x native resolution, which is the 1080p setting, and the game stays mostly at that 60 frames per second target, with just the occasional dip here and there, mostly due to the game itself. In fact, this one could almost upscale to 4x native resolution. And of course we have Shadow of the Colossus, which is always a good way to demonstrate some of the emulation capabilities, and for this one I am running at 3x native resolution, which is again the 1080p resolution, and for the most part it stays at or close to that 60 frames per second target. And remember, we are at 3x resolution, so it can always be scaled back just slightly to stabilize if needed. So for PS3, unfortunately the 6900HX doesn't feature that AVX512 instruction support like some of the slightly newer 7000 series AMD APUs. So while we certainly have a lot of power on hand to brute force our way through many PS3 games, we will still not quite be there for games like God of War 3, which will definitely require heavy tweaking and in my opinion is still not quite there. However, there are still lots of games that will work great with RPCS3, and so let's check out some Wipeout HD Fury, which is always a favorite of mine, but I love using it as a showcase because it's a beautiful game. I have this one set to 1080p, and after most of the shader compilation, this one runs at or near 60 frames per second and is definitely fast and smooth. I also wanted to showcase a far more demanding game with MotorStorm Pacific Rift, and this one is set to the PS3 native resolution of 720p, and with that we are able to stay at or very close to its native frame rate, which is 30 frames per second. There is almost enough power here to get us some upscaling at 900p, but I think for this one, because of how difficult it is to run, 720p is the ideal place for it. Regardless, it does show that we can get up there with PS3 emulation, and outside of some of the incredibly demanding or lower compatibility games, PS3 emulation will fare quite well with a lot of the library. So naturally, after all this gaming and benchmarking, I like to take surface temperatures of the computer itself as well as get an idea of how well things are cooling here. Again, this is all based on that performance mode toggle, which will tax the system a lot harder, and so it is a good representation of that upper limit. There are dual fans inside the AM08 Pro, and it definitely moves air out of the system, keeping thermals in check for the computer itself. On the surface, the casing really is not getting hot at all, and of course unsurprisingly the temperatures are higher in the back where the air exhausts, and demonstrates that we are getting that airflow. I noticed that despite the fans ramped up fully and with a dual fan configuration, I didn't think it was all that loud and also a lot quieter than some of the other mini PCs that I've used, despite it working at full capacity. And so that about does it for this one. I think it's very obvious that AMD's 6900HX is packing quite the punch here, with some seriously solid performance on the emulation front and surprising PC gaming performance as seen with 2023 games like Ratchet and Clank and Diablo 4. For the price point, this is a really solid option for someone that might be looking for a compact mini PC with the capabilities to handle most tasks as well as even manage gaming and emulation. Given its small footprint, there are many use cases such as placing it in your living room as a home theater PC or even throwing it into a travel bag to take with you. In particular, I really like the user-friendly features with the easily upgradable and accessible storage and RAM solutions, as well as being able to toggle performance modes on the fly with the physical dial. It all comes together in a surprisingly attractive package that, despite its gaming chops, isn't over the top with its design. But most of all for me, I really enjoyed taking a look at the Ryzen 9 6900HX, and I hope you did as well. It's clear that AMD's APUs just keep getting better and more powerful, and I'm excited to see what's next. But I will be back soon enough with another mini PC, and until then, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.